Go ahead and go for it.
Okay.
Ahead and go for it. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is our January monthly program. My name is Emmeline, and I'm the current president of the Emerald chapter of the Native Plant Society of Oregon. We are a local nonprofit that is one of the subchapters of the state, the state and main nonprofit. As I'm sure many of you know, seeing some of the folks out there in the chat. Right now, upcoming, some things that you should know about are that we have our February program, which is going to be Ed Alverson talking about the plants of Crete, February 15th at 7 p.m. And please stay tuned for future updates about hikes and walks and classes as the season progresses. So I'm going to turn it over to our program chair, Gail Baker, and she's going to introduce you to this program by Mary Santelmann here tonight.
Hi, everyone, and greetings, and thank you for attending tonight on this important day honoring Martin Luther King. And we really appreciate your interest and support and want to invite all members of our community to give us feedback about how NPSO could engage a really broad audience. We will be having a virtual planning session for future programs and events in June, and that will be announced at our website. And Emmeline has posted a number of links up in the chat site, so you can look at our website link. And all our programs and speakers and topics are the result of your input and input from the community and members and you as an audience. So you are being heard. This is one of those topics that has been suggested. So please do keep in mind that we really want to make this a very inclusive program and a chapter in the Native Plant Society of Oregon. So Darlingtonia, Wayside, and Florence, it's close. And it's probably a site that many of you have visited. Maybe frequently, maybe even taken friends when they used to travel to visit you. And it's certainly one that I have taken my students over the 20 years of my teaching career so they could experience this unique fen habitat. And I also noted a variety of changes over those 20 years. So I'm really excited to hear Mary's presentation. What we'd like to hear about, or Mary is going to talk about, Mary Santelmann is going to talk about, is the history of the site and its ecological setting, as well as the ongoing research that has been designed to help Oregon State Park, which is our state park dedicated to a single plant here, to monitor the site conditions and manage the really pretty vigorous population that's currently at this special wayside. So Mary Santelmann is Director of Water Resources Graduate Program at Oregon State University and has led and collaborated on many interdisciplinary projects. She is from Minnesota, and that's where she earned her bachelor's degree with a foray to Michigan for a master's, and then back to University of Minnesota in Minneapolis for her graduate work, her PhD work, where she studied the ecology and distribution of carex, Exilus. And she also worked in the Grand Canyon as a seasonal interpretive ranger. Now, her research, her overarching research is investigating the influence of human land use and management in a variety of ecosystems, but especially the ecology and biochemistry of wetland habitats. So you'll probably have lots of questions from Mary during the program, and she really invites your participation. So please do post your questions in the chat, and she will try to address them during her presentation. Those questions will be forwarded to her, and she will try to address them, and she certainly will address them at the end. So posted in the chat is more information about Mary, her website, her academic website. There's also Darlingtonia references that from publications that have appeared in Native Plant Society journals and bulletins. So all of those and links to our planning session, the Emerald Chapter website are all in the chat room for you to copy and paste, but most of all, please direct your questions to the chat room and Mary will address them. And with that, I will turn this over to Mary. Thank you for presenting to us.
Well, thank you very much, Gail, for inviting me to give the presentation, and Emma-Lynn for your assistance with the technical aspects of delivering this on YouTube. I also want to give credit to some of my former graduate students, Megan Chelu and Trevor Grandy from Oregon State University, who assisted with the research project that I'll be presenting in the latter part of this talk. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement, also perhaps in honor of Martin Luther King birthday celebration, but I usually start my presentations with this now, because I think it helps us to better consider our shared histories, our present actions, and build a better future if we acknowledge our past. So Oregon State University in Corvallis is located on the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people, and the Siuslaw traditional homelands were on the central Oregon coast of Western Oregon. So in my presentation today, it's kind of divided in three parts. Unique vegetation at Darlingtonia Botanical Wayside. Then I'll go on and talk a little bit about carnivorous plants, of which, of course, Darlingtonia is one, and then go on to give the discussion about our research and monitoring project to study the factors that influence the vigor and abundance of Darlingtonia californica at the Darlingtonia Botanical Wayside. So here's the place that we're looking. This is what it looked like this summer when we were back revisiting our monitoring plots. So it's a unique fen. Well, what is a fen? Some people know, but I'll just make sure everybody's up to speed. A fen's a type of peatland in which either groundwater or surface water that's been in contact with the mineral soil is a primary source of moisture to the site and dominates the hydrology of the site. So fens are usually characterized by water tables above the soil surface. They have highly organic soils, and they often have unique vegetation types, including many rare and endangered plant species. Here is a diagram that Trevor Grandy, who is a geology student as well as a water policy and management student, Trevor made this to illustrate a conceptual model of water flow from the uplands in the regions around Darlingtonia Wayside, and then the their flow through the site. So these are, of course, expanded, kind of exploded scales in the vertical. But what you can see is that there's this potentiometric surface that they identify using well logs. Here's Mercer Lake, and then here is Darlingtonia Wayside. And so the groundwater surface, this water table, is close to the surface. This is a groundwater dependent wetland. So one of the first things happened when I began teaching biogeography at Oregon State University, and Bob Frankel gave me some of his notes and said, you know, when I go to the coast, here are the places I go. You know, I go to Darlingtonia, Botanical, Wayside. And so I took my scouting trips and I got to Darlingtonia and I saw, wow, you know, this looks like some of the boreal peatlands in which I did my dissertation research. There are a number of similarities between the coastal fen vegetation and the places that I was accustomed to. It's kind of a little home for me in Oregon. So I noticed there's this sparse overstory of spruce and pine, a shrub understory dominated by broadleaf evergreen shrubs in the heath, rhododendron, and myrtle families, and these carnivorous plants intermingled with sedges, cotton grass, rushes, and often including rare species, perhaps some orchids, and sphagnum moss ground layer. Some of these are attributes, of course, of coastal fens in general, not specifically of Darlingtonia Wayside, right? But the cool, wet climate of the Oregon coast, the hydric soils of these fens, and the low nutrient availability tends to favor perennial evergreen species, plant carnivory, and also, of course, is a great habitat for ferns and mosses. So the similarity of the life forms and appearance of vegetation, the physiognomy of the vegetation at these boreal peatlands was one of the things that struck me about Darlingtonia Botanical Wayside. So here on the left is a picture of Marcel Bog in northern Minnesota, and on the right again is Darlingtonia. And what you can see is that there is, again, a physiognomic similarity. The canopies are similar, being needle-leaf evergreen in the upper canopy, broadleaf evergreen in the shrub layer, a herbaceous layer with carnivorous plants, ferns, sedges, rushes, and then this moss layer of sphagnum. Of course, the species are different, right? In the coastal fens, we have Sitka spruce and shore pine. We have a ledum, but it's different from the ledum that you see in northeastern US and Canada. We have Gaultheria, we have Myrica, although now what used to be Myrica californica is now called Morella californica. But we have Vaccinium species, and then we have the Darlingtonia as a corresponding carnivorous plant in the boreal forest and boreal peatlands of Sarracenia. Cotton grasses occur in some of these coastal fens. Drosera, of course, the sundew. A number of species of juncus and carex and sphagnum are common. So it's a really interesting vegetation type, and it's very unique. And only a few places in Oregon have this type of vegetation. We're all plant lovers, right? So I thought I'd put in some images of the plants. These are from the USDA plant photo. All my photos are still on 35 millimeter slides of those plants, but for the boreal forest, I do have photos of the Darlingtonia site of my own, but I took the boreal peatland photos from the USDA plant site. So you can see Chamaedaphne colliculata, ledum, kalmia, Myrica gale. All these are, broadleaf evergreen plants that are found in boreal peatlands, and we have similarly broadleaf evergreen species in our coastal fens like Darlingtonia. Boreal peatlands have Sarracenia purpurea. We have Darlingtonia here with similar Drosera, and of course sphagnum moss is found in the ground layer in both boreal peatlands and at Darlingtonia fen. Orchids, now again, some of these, the boreal peatlands, I've seen the begonia orchids and the juncus species and cotton grass. However, not all of the images on the right-hand side for the coastal fens are from Darlingtonia. But these are species that have been found there. John Christie's characterization of wetlands talks about these, and you can see also in the Atlas of Oregon Flora, you'll see many of these species have been found either in fens nearby or locations nearby the Darlingtonia Botanical Wayside. So moving on, I guess maybe I'll stop here. Emma Lynn, are there questions about the first part? So I'm at the end of my first third of my talk. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to pick up on some of those questions right now.
No, I don't see any questions in the chat, but people can feel free to put them in there whenever they have them.
All right.
I will pass them on to you, Mary, as soon as I see one, okay?
All right, that sounds good. And of course, if you think of something about the first half of the talk, we can always go back later on at the end. So now moving on to plant carnivory, and this is something that Megan Cellu really, my graduate student in geography, she was so excited about carnivorous plants, and she actually invited Aaron Ellison down to Darlingtonia Botanical Wayside. It just so happened that we had the Ecological Society of America meetings in Portland the year that she started working on the site, and so Aaron was coming, and so she invited him to come down and visit Darlingtonia Wayside with her. And of course, she had also read a number of his publications about carnivorous plants in North America. So what we know about plant carnivory is that it evolved at least 6 times in flowering plants, and that carnivorous plants occur on every continent except for Antarctica. It's considered an adaptation to soils that are poor in nitrogen and phosphorus, because the insects that are trapped in these in the tubes of carnivorous plants provide that source of nutrition for the plants. You can see in the map in red the distribution of the family throughout America, and that's from Aaron Ellison's 20.
Mary, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but it looks like your slides aren't advancing.
Oh dear. Where are you?
We are still stuck on similarity of vegetation, physiognomy, and boreal peatlands and coastal fens. So after you asked us for questions, it looks like your slides stopped there.
Yeah, right there?
Yeah, I apologize for advancing or for interrupting you, but it seemed urgent.
No, that's fine. So can you now see the images of the broadleaf evergreen shrubs?
No, it's still it still is the same slide.
You know what I'm going to do is stop sharing, and then I'm going to start sharing again, so that we'll try it over again. All right.
I'm sure that sounds good. We got Margaret, Karen, Ceylon, and Bruce out there all not seeing your slides, which I'm
sure I
need to see.
I spent a lot of time putting these together. I want you to see them. There, now can you see the broadleaf evergreen shrub images?
Yes, I can, and it looks great.
All right. I think I need to keep my cursor on the slide before I hit switch. All right, so again, these are the boreal peatland broadleaf evergreen shrubs and sort of corresponding species of broadleaf evergreen shrubs in Darlingtonia fen or similar fens. Here are the carnivorous plants. And Emmeline, you can just give me a thumbs up if the slide switched when I moved on. So the corresponding carnivorous plants from boreal peatlands, and then what we see when we go to Darlingtonia fen or other coastal fens nearby. And then while I haven't seen orchids like spiranthes, oh geez, there's a mistake in spelling, dang. Forget, there's one N too many in Romans-Ophiana, but I know Barbara Wilson has collected that from deflation plains nearby, and so I'm pretty sure that that there are that these coastal fens will have some species of orchids. I've seen the juncus. In any case, these coastal fens, and particularly also according to John Christie, have a flora that includes these rushes, carices, cotton grasses, and orchids. So another similarity, not necessarily at Darlingtonia, but of coastal fens with this vegetation type in general. Now moving on to plant carnivory. We know that it evolved again 6 times in flowering plants. It's an adaptation to the poor nutrient soils, and that Darlingtonia is actually this little tiny spot over in Oregon and in Northern California. It's the only member of the Sarraceniaceae found west of the Rockies. And here's an example close up where you can see these little fenestrations, these little kind of windows of light that you can see how an insect that got into the hood could think that it might be able to get out by flying up. And instead, that's not the way it could get out. And they usually die while they're trying to do that. So Darlingtonia was established, the preserve was established in the late 1960s and dedicated specifically for the protection of this population of the rare plant Darlingtonia californica. And when Gail actually and I first both started taking field trips there, what I noticed was there were very tall shrubs and trees that were in the overstory of broadleaf shrubs. They're almost had gone beyond being shrubs to being small trees. And so throughout the 90s, when we visited that fen, it was overgrown with trees and shrubs. And somewhere in the late 90s, early 2000s, state parks became so concerned about the possibility that they would lose the population to being overgrown by trees and that Darlingtonia would be shaded out, that they went in and they cut down most of the trees that were in the fen itself. So it became much more open the way that you saw in the photos at the start of this talk. But they were concerned about the population, and they wanted us to help them do some research to determine whether there were significant trends in the abundance and vigor of the population at the Wayside. So in order to do that, we had to establish what the current level of abundance was. And they also wanted us to investigate what factors were influencing the cover, abundance, and vigor of Darlingtonia at the Wayside. So, of course, we knew, and it was already in the literature, that Darlingtonia tends to occur and thrive in open, sunny settings that have cool, moist, nitrogen-poor soil. But what we didn't know was, well, how cool, how moist, and how sunny does it need to be? How many trees can you leave at the site before Darlingtonia becomes shaded out? And what about other factors like the water table or the concentration of nitrogen in the soil water? The current management strategies include removal of trees and shrubs. They also had to put sandbag and log dams in because the Department of Transportation had put a culvert in over by Highway 101, and they were concerned that that may have lowered the water table in the fen, which could be detrimental to the Darlingtonia population. And so we began a project to explore those factors, and I will describe that next. So first we established 24 long-term monitoring plots that are 1 meter by 1 meter squared, 12 of them in shaded areas and 12 in sunny areas in 4 different parts of the fen. In each of the plots, we identified and counted the ramets, and we noted how many ramets were in each age class, either young, immature ramets, the mature ramets, or senescent ones. We also noted the number of flowers. In the plots, we also recorded the percent cover of graminoids and shrub in order to give a sense of, be able to look at the potential for invasive species or tree encroachment over time. And with collaboration from my colleague Chris Parrish in civil engineering, we did a little pilot study using ground-based LiDAR to create digital images of the site. So here you can see our monitoring plot layout. With the photograph that I showed you from at the start was taken from this part of the boardwalk. So here's the boardwalk or deck along that goes around the fen. The sign, the informational sign, is kind of in the center where my cursor is here. So this is the north part of the fen. This is what we call the central fen. It's on the west side. Down here is the south, and then here is the eastern, what we call the eastern part or contained part of the fen in some of the figures later on. So we did sampling starting in 2016. Here's Megan Chelou, and in 2016, here's me in 2020. Both of these monitoring projects, we were able to get some undergraduates also out in the field. A number of undergraduates have gotten some field experience through internships on this project. And so the work that you see, the counts from 2016 are done by Megan Chelou. I was there for part of that time, but she did, she finished up on the second and third days that she was out there, and also recorded the amount of sun and the amount of shade in each plot. Here's an example. You can see some of the, here's what we would call a shade plot in the western part of the fen. You can see the trees right here. And here's a sun plot also in the central fen, but closer to the boardwalk. So what our monitoring data showed us in 2016, the total number of ramets, of living ramets per plot, was about 64 in the sun, about 53 in the shade. When I returned in 2020 and counted, we had about 66 in the sun and 66 in the shade. A few more of the young ramets and a few more of the mature ramets, and fewer of the senesced ramets. So here's a stacked bar graph. So you can see the 4 bars on the left are from the north part of the fen. So you can see in 2016, the sun plots in the north. In 2020, the sun plots in the north. Those are the 2 bars at the far left. And the number that you see on the left is the number of ramets. In 2016, the number of ramets in the shade, and in 2020, the number of ramets in the shade are the 2 that are the 3rd and 4th bars from the left. And then you see the eastern part of the fen, the contained part of the fen, the western part of the fen, and the southern part of the fen. And what I guess I would like you to notice is that, well, first of all, there's a difference, right? It's a good thing that we didn't just do all our research in one part, that we did blocking. So we have separated and had plots in each section of the fen, because the sections are different. And then the response of the plants differs a little bit, which I will, the response of the plants to sun and shade differs a little bit in the different sections. And I'll talk about that in a few slides. So we actually did not find a significant effect of shade in and of itself. And that is in part because shade interacts with the section of the fen. So what we did see that you can see for yourself in the previous bar graph is that the section of the fen is probably the strongest factor. Where you are in the fen determines the abundance of the plant. Year is slightly important, slightly significant, at least for the mature and juvenile ramets. But there's this shade by fen section interaction, which means that in the northern part of the fen, shade actually, there's a few more ramets in the shade and fewer in the sun. Whereas in the southern part of the fen, there's actually more ramets in the sun and fewer in the shade. So it flip-flops depending on which part of the fen that you're in. Well, why is that? Well, in part, this may be due to soil temperature. So in 2018, we took Tidbit temperature sensors and we put them out for a year, about 10 centimeters below the surface of the fen, so below the surface of the mosses, and we hung them on the little PVC pipe markers of our plots. And what you see here are the plots of the northern section of the fen and the southern section of the fen, the temperatures in the sun and the temperatures in the shade taken on an hourly basis throughout the year. And what you'll probably notice is that the north part of the fen is warmer. So one of the things that that we noticed when we're there is that there's a slightly higher moss surface. It's higher above the water table, especially in some parts. And it's very sunny because the sun is shining from the when it comes up over the trees at the southern end, that northern part of the fen is in the sun longer, and so the temperatures are warmer. And it turns out if you look at the literature on what are the optimal temperatures for Darlingtonia, they'll tell you that Darlingtonia has to be kept cooler than, the roots have to be kept cooler than 10 degrees Celsius. Well, you can see that the temperatures are above 10 degrees Celsius in May, June, July, August, September of the year, and they're even warmer in the north section of the fen. Here's a 24-hour profile that we did just for the time of July 1st through 7th. So this is over the course of one day, so that you can actually just look at a single day, and these are averages over the week for the northern part of the fen and then all other parts of the fen. And here I split out the temperature sensors that were submerged in the shade and those that were submerged in the sun. So you can see in most of the fen, the blue and the red graph at the bottom, those are for all of the other sections, not just the north section. And you can see that those temperatures are cooler. But even when the sensors were submerged, so they weren't up above the water table, when they were in the shade and the sun, they were warmer than in other parts of the fen. And so, so I think that the sun and the shade and the temperature and the water table are interacting at the site. And it's important to know that when you're thinking about how to manage the populations at the site. So, and back to that graph again. So here, the sun, here are those, the northern section of the fen, there are fewer ramets in the plots in the sun, more in the plots in the shade. But in the south, there's, first of all, more ramets per plot. And in the west, there's more ramets per plot, but also there's fewer in the shade and more in the sun. So so the take-home message is, if somebody asked me, well, what's the effect of shade? I'd say, which part of the fen are you talking about, right? It isn't, it's not a single effect. It's different depending on where you are in the fen. So another thing we wanted to look at, having worked in fens in Minnesota and in some other places, I've seen places where the people have been walking in and out a lot, and it tends to cause trampling, and that can actually also influence the hydrology of the site over time. And so I wanted to make sure that our sampling was not going to trample. We took a lot of care. Most of the time, when you saw me or Meg and Chelu standing in the fen, we were standing on little stumps and clumps of grass. We're not standing on Darlingtonia. We took a lot of care not to stand on or trample or wade through the site, but to go in from around or from the boardwalk in places where we're not going to trample the species. But we're concerned just to make sure over time, maybe there are better ways to do this. And we thought that maybe some of the newer remote sensing techniques would be helpful. And so Dr. Chris Parrish very kindly, because he did this completely for free and on his own, which is, you know, he said, well, sure, I'll bring my ground-based LiDAR system down and I'll take some imagery for you at this fen. Well, really for state parks, right? And so on the right, so on the left is the real thing. That's the equipment, or one of the pieces of equipment he had. And on the right is a false color image of the digital imagery taken with the ground-based LiDAR. And here's another example of that digital imagery that you can see. You can see the black shadow is a shadow where the LiDAR could not penetrate, right? That the boardwalk railing prevented a signal from coming through. But you can see quite a few of the ramets, and you can actually see a shrub in the foreground. So Megan Chelu, the graduate student in geography who did some of the monitoring plot in 2016, she also worked on this data. And so she went in and counted every one of the ramets that she could see in the imagery from the different parts of the fen. This is why you have graduate students. and this was, by the way, this was not her master's degree. This was a summer project for her that used the funding from the state park. So she was really dedicated to go in and do this as an add-on to the work that she was doing in salt marshes for her graduate. So she counted every one of the ramets that she could see, and then came up with this data set for the number of ramets that she could see in the South Fen, Central Fen, the North, and the contained fen. And the total number of ramets that she saw were live and that could be seen with the imagery was about 3,500. She counted thousands of those ramets. But while she was doing that, she also found that the Darlingtonia imagery is imperfect. The individuals, they'll shade out the ones behind them, just the way that railing creates a shadow. Individual ramets prevent us from seeing the ones behind them. And if there's a tree or a shrub in the way, you're also going to have a shadow effect. It can, however, provide an estimate of the overall population, and it gives us something to work from 2016. And I will say also that photogrammetry, if it were possible and someone wanted to set up stationary repeat photography sites where you could have both from above and at many different angles around the fen, you can actually do three-dimensional photogrammetry that would allow you to do a much better job of counting the ramets. But that'd be a whole nother study, and that's actually not my area of expertise, so I'm not planning to do that. But that is a technique that could be very successful in an area like this. So the outcomes of our work and our conclusions were that there's definitely a strong and significant difference between the North Fen and the other blocks in the fen, that the population still seems to be very vigorous and abundant, and particularly in the south and central or western portion of the fen, which are the sunniest and wettest parts of the fen. That there's a strong interaction effect between shade and the section of the fen that you're on, and that we are not seeing a decline in the abundance of the population. And indeed, just from anecdotal observation, I would say that the population kind of has bounced back right after they cut all the trees, particularly in that central part of the fen. The population had I think that's sunburn. I mean, you could really see that the plants, there'd been disturbance, and they did not look terribly healthy. Well, the individuals have bounced back from that, and they look much more vigorous than they did right after that that removal of the shrub and tree canopy. But the temperature data that we collected leads us to recommend that it may be important to continue both monitoring temperature at the site and the water table levels, because those could be critical to maintaining the health of this population. Here's also some more resources that you might be interested in if you're interested in studying Darlingtonia and fens on the Oregon coast. And now I'm ready to take some questions.
Mary, are you able to see? There's a couple questions that I've put in the chat for you, if you can see them.
All right, I think I may be able to see. Okay, yes, I can. All right, and thank you for helping me out with the slide advancing. There used to be Darlingtonia at Sutton Creek Campground, and is it still there? We were talking about that before we started. I am not sure. That would be something that it'd be great to go in and find out. I have not checked. If someone else out there has seen it recently, I tried to get an undergrad interested in going out to all of the places that were mapped as locales in the Atlas of Oregon Flora and revisit those to do something like this, but I couldn't. The pandemic hit, and so we weren't able to do that this summer. That was sort of an add-on. I try to leverage the opportunities that we have, like with undergrad interns who could do something like that, but Haven't done that lately, but I have. If anybody out there has heard about or remarked about that, you can put your information in the chat. What is the life of the ramlet and how long do they live? That's a great question. You know, there's a publication by the Forest Service has these fire effects publications on different plants, and I think that they have listed that in their. Let me see if I might not be able to get this fast enough to answer that question, but yeah, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one because, but if you go on the internet and you look up the U.S. Forest Service Fire Effects Program in Darlingtonia, you can actually find out that yourself. I think that they in my observations, they have small clusters of about 5 juveniles around an individual larger ramlet, and then it looks like the ramlets last maybe a couple years because you can see some that seem to be senescing and are older than the ones that are sort of starting to senesce. But the other thing I was thinking, and I don't, again, we didn't mark individual ramlets, but a hypothesis that I have, one of the things that I noticed, you know, in 2015, it was a very dry year, right? And the fact that Megan Chellew counted many more senescent ramlets than we counted, and that we got more juveniles. I'm wondering if that dry year in 2015 caused faster senescence of the mature ramlets, so that we were counting more mature and senescent ramlets, more senescent ramlets in 2016, because this was June, right? These are ramlets that overwintered. And so one of my hypotheses about why did Megan count more senescent ones than I did, I think it's maybe because 2016 was a year that kind of aged those ramlets faster. The disjunct nature of the Darlingtonia genus, I don't know. I don't know about that. Good questions though. What sort of insects? What I did that. So flies and apparently moths are attracted to Darlingtonia, and those are that they capture. Inside the tube, there are populations of insects that actually live inside the tube, some spiders and some mites and bacteria, which they are responsible for digesting the insects that fall into the tube. Okay, someone says that that they visited the Sutton campground and there were no Darlingtonia at all on the Darlingtonia walkway at Sutton campground. So it's possible that that population has died out. And how does the surrounding vegetation affect insect populations and diversity, and what's known about the variety of insects that are consumed? I guess that is an area outside of my expertise, but there are a number of people that there's a number of publications about that, and I can send Gail. Some of those are actually cited in our report to the state parks, so I can send that report to Gail, and she can share the resource list with people who want to look at, because there at least a couple of those publications were about the insect fauna within the tubes of the Darlingtonia. And I do not know when this unique population was established. Okay, here's a question about the house across the road and the highway. Could that affect the temperature? We were more concerned about whether the house across the road might affect the water table level by having a well and pumping groundwater for their use than we were about the house across the road affecting the temperature. But we actually installed a small well and pressure transducer to monitor the water table level within the fen. We did that on an hourly basis, and we monitored the temperature of the groundwater table in the fen as well. And it looks like, even though sometimes we think we see minor movement of the water table level in the fen that could be related to like withdrawals from a well, it was not enough to draw the water table down past where it normally would go, and it always rebounded back up. And the other thing we were looking for would be whether the septic system or other sources of nitrogen might be getting into the fen. And so we did some analyses of the water that we collected out of the sampling well, and we did not see high levels of nitrate or phosphorus. And so we saw no indication that there was any leakage for septic systems or other sources of nitrogen into the fen. Okay, a couple new ones. Do I ever notice seeds or seed pods? Well, I noticed the flowers, and by the time I'm back there, it's past the time when they'd be producing seed pods, and I don't go tromping around to look at the seed pods. So I have to say, there's always usually 1 to 3 flowers in each of our monitoring plots when we see them. They do produce seed, and it is possible to grow them from seed. They're not particularly, I think the germination rate says that we're like less than 30%, but the literature does say that you can grow them from seed. And do people poach these to sell? Oh, well, I mean, I've seen Darlingtonia for sale. Somebody's got a tub outside their house. Where they got them, I don't know. And so I can't say. I do know that people are concerned about some of our rare plants on the Oregon coast, the cotton grasses, for example. You can't find the locations, because if you look them up on the atlas, it'll tell you that you are not allowed to know where individual collections were made, because they're worried about people collecting them and destroying these rare and endangered populations. So I would say there's probably a problem with collection, but most of the time when we were out there doing our sampling and doing our monitoring, everybody that came on the boardwalk, they were all enthusiasts. They all seemed to be people that loved to come and see those plants there. They were concerned. They want to know what we were doing there and making sure that we had a right to be there, that it was okay with the state parks. They were interested in the research, and every time people were always very concerned. I met a bunch of wonderful people who were really interested in what we're doing. It was after a while, actually, when I was there with Megan Chillu and the undergrad, I was the one that was designated to talk to the visitors, and they just got the work done, because we get more and more people coming by, and by and large, everybody seemed to be, not the kind of people who would poach the plants. But you can never say that it won't be a problem, because then something had happened. But I mean, that's the good news, right? That it would be hard to poach plants from there, because it has a great clientele. There's a lot of people that use that Wayside. And so, the best thing is to have people who love the place there all the time, coming through and visiting, and that may keep bad actors out. All right, Gail, thank you. Gail says there are quite a few seed pods, and she has noticed them in late summer. See, I'm never out there in late summer, so I'm always there in the springtime. So thank you, Gail. We have somebody that says there was Darlingtonia in a ditch on the west side of 101, and that was dying out due to alder shading. Well, I think shading is a problem. I think, well, actually, one of the things that Aaron Ellison said when he came to the site was that he thought it could use a good burn. Now, in many parts, there are Darlingtonia populations up at higher elevations, and some of those fens either have burned naturally or there have been prescribed burns. I don't know. I would be reluctant, in such a small site to have a burn, just because Well, first of all, you had to be very sure that it didn't get out of control. And second, you know, you'd want to be able to do some adaptive management, right? To see if it actually does improve things. And, you know, it's an awfully small site to be burning parts of it. So I guess my biggest concern is I've seen some Himalayan blackberry get established in parts of it that they're a little higher. And I hate to see that, you know, we actually, and some dandelion, not, you know, Epicurus radicata, so false dandelion is coming in places. I think that, so if I were state parks, I would be concerned that maybe that water table level isn't as high as it used to be. And so it's high enough to keep the population there, but maybe they would want to keep it higher to keep out some of the plants that aren't obligate wetland plants. And then if I were them, I would also, there might be sort of an intermediate amount of shading that keeps the soil cool while also, you know, not shading the plants out. So I'd be, you know, if I were them, I would really, yeah, they die in gardens. They need moving water, which they don't get in gardens. I think that's why the 10 degrees Celsius threshold, I think that's for greenhouse experiments. And I think that is probably why they give that threshold, that if they can keep them cooler, then they are less likely to die in the gardens. But I think where I see them in the fen, where they are most vigorous is where you can actually look and you can see the water in the fen moving through. Okay, they are poached and sold, says Bruce Newhouse. He's seen holes dug in Darlingtonia fens in Southwest Oregon. Are pitcher plants and Darlingtonia closely related genetically? Well, I mean, they are in the same family. And Bruce also says they die in gardens. So these people who poach them, they're just sending them off to their death. So don't poach them. But I'm sure you guys are not the problem. Is that all our questions?
Well, I'm not seeing much else in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you everyone who's out there listening to our YouTube channel as well. Let me check that chat one more time.
Yeah, I want to thank the people who helped me with these questions, Bruce Newhouse and Gail Baker in particular, and Dave Wagner. And thank you all for your attention and for your questions. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Martin Luther King birthday holiday and wonderful rest of the week.
Well, thanks, Mary. We have a lot of appreciation coming in on that YouTube chat. So thank you all so much.
Yeah, and it's exciting here. Ed Alverson is going to be talking at your next. He's a great botanist. I remember visiting some of the wet prairie wetlands in the Eugene area with him, and I had a great time listening to him and benefiting from his experience there. So awesome.
If you have a chance for one more question, we have, I just dropped it in the chat there in Zoom. It's asking about the Southern Oregon Deer Creek population.
Yeah, and I don't know about that population. As I say, my hope at the last spring when I was recruiting the undergraduate field assistant for my biogeography class was that not only would he help me with the monitoring, but I thought he could do, you know, I could send him around to all the different populations and have him take pictures and record whether or not we were still seeing Darlingtonia there, and the pandemic pretty much put the end of that. We're just lucky to be able to travel to get our monitoring done, where we're not allowed, you know, we're gonna, I had to write a whole research resumption plan and submit it to my college just to get out. I had to drive in I had to take my own car and let the undergrad drive the university vehicle. We couldn't even be in the same car to do this work. So I would have to be, but that's a good thing. Now I'm getting, like, I want to find out the answer to those questions. So maybe next time I'll know.
Well,
All right.
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Mary. And thanks everybody for attending tonight. We really appreciate it. And we'll give you a virtual clap.
Thank you so much. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye. Thanks, everyone.